We continue this week on Lord's Day 10 of the Heidelberg Catechism to look at parts of the Apostles' Creed, specifically this week, the sovereignty and providence of God. So I want to prepare you right now from the start. There's going to be some beliefs we talk about today that we're going to differ in. And I will also tell you that this might get just a little bit detailed, but hang with me. So let me just get right to the questions. Question 27 this week is, what do you understand by the providence of God? The answer is this: providence is the almighty and ever-present power of God by which he upholds, as with his hand, heaven and earth and all creatures, and so rules them that leaf and blade, rain and drought, fruitful and lean years, food and drink, health and sickness, prosperity and poverty, all things, in fact, come to us not by chance, but from his fatherly hand. And now question number 28. How does the knowledge of God's creation and providence help us? And the answer is this: we can be patient when things go against us, thankful when things go well, and for the future we can have good confidence in our faithful God and Father that nothing will separate us from his love. All creatures are so completely in his hand that without his will, they can neither move nor be moved. So let me give you a definition of providence. This comes from the New International Bible Dictionary by Zondervan. It states that the meaning of providence means prearrangement and nothing short of the universal sovereign rule of God. Listen to Ephesians 1, verses 11 and 12. I'm using the NIV translation. In him, meaning Christ, we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of him, now meaning God, who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will, in order that we, who were the first to hope in Christ, might be for the praise of his glory. So the phrase related to predestined is translated in other versions this way: chose us in advance, from the NLT. In the Amplified Bible, it says this, that foreordained, chosen, appointed beforehand. This is the interesting word and concept, and the one that brings debate. And this is where our individual beliefs may differ slightly. So one point of view, it's the Calvinist point of view, would say that God has already picked beforehand who would be saved and therefore who would not. An individual person has no choice in the matter. The other point of view, which is the Arminian point of view, which is generally where the United Methodists fall, says that God knew beforehand how each person would choose, but each person does have a free will to choose or not. Now let me give you a key point that Wesley would point out, and that is that the only way a person can choose is because God is working in their life through his grace. This is what Wesley would refer to as preventing grace, or prevenient grace, the grace that is wooing us back to God. Each point of view, each camp, if you will, gets their beliefs from the Bible, reading and interpreting the Bible. I've said before, I don't really believe that it's about Bible authority. I simply believe it's about different interpretation. So right or wrong, here's what I believe. If you're hearing this and you're a Christian, whether God chose you to be saved before time began or whether you chose and God knew your choice before time began, the good news is that you are a Christian, and with true faith you'll remain a Christian. If you're reading or hearing this and you have not committed your life to Christ yet, the good news is that you are at least thinking about it. And if you do choose to follow Christ, that's great news. Again, whether God chose you before time began or whether you're making a free will choice yourself. Again, as Wesley would say, with God's help, with his prevenient or preventing grace. I also believe that in terms of God's sovereignty, God can act and he will act according to his will. But I do believe that God can and will act within the totality of who he is. In other words, all of God's characteristics play a part on how God acts, and he can't or won't do anything that's outside of his total character. A book I've read before is called Calvin versus Wesley, Bringing Belief in Line with Practice by Don Thorson. The very first chapter in the book, comparing Calvin, who again believed in predestination based upon God's sovereignty, comparing Calvin to Wesley, is entitled God, More Love Than Sovereignty. So let me share a little bit that I gleaned from that chapter. First of all, Calvin believed in the absolute sovereignty of God, and he believes that the future of all occurs by the will or decrees of God which occurred before the world was created. Let me point out a couple things. First of all, Calvin didn't believe that God would be responsible for sin and evil. And while we don't understand everything that happens, Calvin would say that it's because God has not revealed all truths to humans yet. Make no mistake, Wesley believed in the sovereignty of God as well, and that God will, quote, do what he will with his own, unquote. Here's another quote from Wesley. There are no bounds to his power and his presence. He doeth whatever pleaseth him. But see, to Wesley, God's sovereignty is not more important than his other attributes, including his love. Because of God's relationship with humans, he also has attributes of grace, patience, goodness, and forgiveness, even while having love, mercy, truth, and justice. And further, acknowledging God's power and sovereignty does not preclude God from voluntarily restricting his divine power and giving people genuine freedom of choice. God knows ahead of time his foreknowledge what each person will choose. So again, speaking from a Wesleyan point of view, one might even ask the question about who is actually predestined in the verses that refer to this concept of predestination. Is it each person that was predestined? Or is in general the followers of Jesus, the ones that choose to follow Jesus, that are predestined? That's a good question to me. On the back cover of that same book I cited earlier, Calvin versus Wesley, you know the back where various important people make a point about the book. There are the following words at the top. When we stand at the pearly gates, God will not ask us what we believed, but how we lived. So going back to the Apostles' Creed, we hear in the very first part of it, I believe in God the Father, Almighty, Creator in heaven and earth. For some, the underlying beliefs of that statement mean God is sovereign and can and will do anything he wants, including predestining people to their eternal place, even before the creation of the world. For others, that statement may mean that God is sovereign, but he is also love, and through his love gives people a chance to choose to follow Christ or not. However we believe that statement, maybe we should believe the real question for us should become, how does this statement, God is the Father Almighty, Creator of heaven and earth, how does that statement, assuming we believe it, change the way we live our lives? This ends Lord's Day 10. See you next week for Lord's Day 11.